Hey everyone, it's Danielle Terciano of Made Possible by Pop Culture, the podcast, and I'm bringing you yet another episode where I invite a guest to share their pop culture influences from past and present times. Today, I'm very happy to welcome that special guest, Jenny Hagel. She's a writer and a comedian who you probably know best from Jokes Seth Can't Tell, which of course is a segment on Late Night with Seth Meyers, where she is a writer and a performer. She's also involved in a really fun live show right now that she's touring with titled Jenny Hagel Gives Advice. So I'm super excited she took time out of that to come on and talk about a lot of things. So Jenny, obviously, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk about pop culture with you.
Everyone knows I always start in the past. I always start with what influenced you when you were younger, and younger can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. So I want you to set up what you picked, but what it is, and also specifically like where were you, when were you in your life when you found it, and what made you fall in love with it?
Great. The piece of pop culture that I chose is a indie film from the early 2000s called Kissing Jessica Stein. I stumbled across this movie strictly because I got free tickets to it. I worked at a place that shared a building with a movie theater, and so we got to get free tickets to the movies that were shown there. So my roommate and I were both equally broke in our early 20s, so we decided to go see this movie. And it is about a woman who identifies as straight, who's fed up with dating men. So she kind of is at the end of her rope, and she's like, you know what, I'm going to go on a date with a woman. I'm just going to see. And she goes on a date with this woman and falls in love with her, but spends the rest of the movie like wrestling with her identity and trying to be like, but I'm not gay. I can't be gay because of all of these things. And it just happened that the main character in the movie was a lot like me in a bunch of ways, like very type A. She was a writer. She's like kind of like buttoned up,
Yeah.
kind of like and not conservative politically, conservative personality wise, like very like doesn't take risks. And then it just happened that all of the reasons she kept telling herself for why she couldn't be gay all resonated with me. She was like, well, I can't be gay because of this and that. And I can't be gay because of this and that. And I was like, as the movie went on, I was like, wait a second. These are all things that I have said to myself. And then at the end of the movie, when the lights came up, I was like, oh, holy shit, I am gay.
So
So it,
yeah, I was gonna say, I love that you picked this for like a deeply personal reason.
I
Not that we're
did.
going to turn this into a therapy session, but that's part of what I love about this format of just like when I say pick something that influenced you, the influence sometimes can go in so many different ways.
Yeah,
And I want you to continue your thought, but as you continue your thought, I want you to think in the back of your mind, because this will be a follow-up, how you felt about the ending of the movie when you first saw it versus how you think about it now.
for sure. That's an excellent question. But I mean, and it also, the film impacted me in two very different ways. I mean, on the personal track, of course, I just was like, this is, and it's like one of the things too, I think some people who, when they think about coming out, think of it as something that they wrestled with for a long time, that they knew, and it was this closely guarded secret. And I really didn't have that as much as a lot of queer people do. I really had convinced myself with this list of reasons that this woman outlines in this film that I could not possibly be gay because of various reasons. And then, like, when I tell you it was like, um, I had somebody tell me one time that they were talking about realizing something about themselves. And they said, once you ring the bell, you can't unring it. And that is
Yeah.
a phrase that has always stuck with me. And it was exactly that. And it was probably a year before I came out to friends after that. But when I tell you there was no moment after that where internally I was like, maybe I'm straight. And so it really made a big impact to me um, personally, but also it really expanded. I mean, a big part of why I had thought I couldn't be gay is because you almost never saw gay women depicted in any kind of media. I think there's a long history of, I mean, queer people are underrepresented in general in
Mhm.
media, but there is a long history of depicting queer men in media,
Right.
often negatively, but they at least exist and they're kind of floating around. Lesbians almost felt like they had like a just like this kind of mystery, like you heard whisper that they existed, but there wasn't like like the way we have like the gay hairdresser and the gay this and that. Like again, not great or expansive
Sure,
roles,
but
but
something.
something. And so I think I had this very cartoonish idea that lesbians were, they rode, there was like a lady on a motorcycle and she had a leather jacket with no sleeves and a crew cut, and that was it. Now, is there anything wrong with being that? No.
No, but
Sounds
that's
dope as
one
hell. That's
one
not
type.
right. And so I would think every once in a while, I think, am I attracted to that girl? And then I'd look in the mirror and be like, well, no, I can't be gay because I look like this. And so it also just expanded my idea of like, oh, a queer person can look like anything
Hmm.
because this one looks very like in the movie, the main character looks very like what we would, I guess, refer to as like traditionally female or like kind of mainstream feminine expression. And I was like, oh, that has nothing to do with it. Got it. So I think it also like in that sense was just like very new in that way. And then I also just as somebody who was like an aspiring writer and performer, a thing I also really loved is like the movie was made independently. These
Okay.
women were aspiring actors. They, were in the early stages of their career. They decided to write something themselves through a series of various steps with studios and blah, blah, blah. And it ended up becoming this film. I think they had a studio deal for a while and then it just never got made. So then they like, I don't know, they bought back the rights or got the rights back and funded it themselves. Like, so in that sense, I think that has nothing to do with queerness. I just was like, because then I became, of course, very fascinated by the movie and read anything I could get my
Right. I
hands
was just going to say, like, the layers that you've added,
on.
you
Right.
attach to it for one reason, but then because you feel so strongly that this is an important piece of media, now you are doing that. I would say extra step. I think that the people who come on this podcast all do that because they all have this deep love and appreciation and they want the knowledge too. But I think that is an extra step that is proven why this is so important to you because not everybody cares about the behind the scenes.
Yeah, no, I just think, and I think especially, I mean, there's so many subsets of people in the population who are underrepresented in
Yeah.
entertainment, right? But you've got, obviously like women are given far fewer chances to write and direct and create their own stuff. And then you have these two women who are like, let's write our own thing. Also, let's be in it. Also, let's figure out the funding structure. And so I think that was really, that meant a lot to me as a young woman in comedy,
Mm.
a young queer woman in comedy. Like, no one's looking for me. Like, comedy's not, I mean, some of us exist in comedy, but wait, it's a big, like, straight, cis het white dudes game. And so
Yeah.
I think it was really
Especially
exciting.
that was 20.
2002, maybe?
Yeah, I was trying to think of how many years ago it was, but we've all learned math is not my strong suit. So like 20
I
something
know.
years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it was very influential to me in that sense too. There's like, oh, they wrote it and they starred in it and they had a thing that they wanted to say and they had roles that they wanted to take on performance wise and they did all of it and they made it and it was very like I do a lot of work with Amber Ruffin
Yeah.
at Late Night with Seth Meyers and then we also had Amber Ruffin show for a while and
Hmm.
we used to always kind of say that like sometimes it would just have a feel of hey kids let's put on a show
Hmm.
like that feeling of like you're at camp and you're going to put on a show and you're going to use whatever you've got and I think I really any story where people are like can't get their foothold in the mainstream industry so
Yeah.
they're like, hey kids let's put on a show. I love any story like that.
So I do want to go back though, because you're already an adult when you're seeing this movie. I would argue fully formed as a person. And as you're coming to this realization about yourself, what does then that ending mean to you? Do you like, because I will say this, as somebody who saw the movie a few years after it came out, and I think I might be a little younger than you. I was in college when I saw it a few years after. So, I'm saying that to say that when I saw the ending, I didn't assume she ended up with Josh. But I see a lot of discourse, especially now that people are finding it on DVD or Amazon or wherever, where people get upset and they say how, this movie is about this queer awakening and she ends up with the dude. And I didn't have I don't know if I was in the minority at the time. Sometimes my brain works differently when I view things than other people, but I'm curious how you felt about the film ending, regardless of the Josh impact, the fact that, the two women are not together in the end, they're friends, but this love story comes to an end.
Sure. I think, again, like I think because I wasn't out yet and I didn't know a lot about queer culture, the history of queer art and film, at the time I was just like, oh, that's a bummer they don't end up together. I mean, now I'm more educated about stuff like that. I think that, lesbian bed death is kind of a cliche.
Mhm.
But I think it was very much of the time, right? So I think, to my knowledge,
Fair.
those two women do not identify as queer. That was also a thing people were fine. They were fine with two straight identified people making a queer
True.
story.
It's fair.
I think now people would be like, why are you doing that? You don't know what you're talking about. But I think that was a time when that was fine, and or at least when more people thought that was fine. Um, and I think that there also was this really prevalent idea at that time that being a lesbian was a thing you could be, but it also could be a thing that you could visit. Like
Mm.
the phrase "it's a phase" was very, very common. People said that a lot. Well, she's not gay; it's a phase. And so I think like it unfortunately reflects a lot of that mentality of that time period. I think if that movie were to drop today, it might be
Right.
seen as more of like an exploration of the spectrum. Because I don't think it's insane that two
No,
women who dated men their whole lives
of
would both
course.
would both be like, "Hey, let me try dating a woman," and that one of them would be like, "Oh shit, this is where I'm supposed to be," and that one of them would be like, "I really liked Helen, but I think I'm actually straight." I think that is a journey that a lot of people go on now, and that might be more of a discussion of the spectrum. It might be more discussion of bisexuality,
Yeah,
whereas I
I
think,
was actually going to ask you if you actually think she does identify as straight by the end of the movie because I kept getting vibes that she was just asexual based, especially based on the argument that they had. The reason they broke up was that she just wanted like romance and friendship, and that wasn't enough for and that's a valid, I think, thing,
sure,
reason for
I mean,
people to break
yeah,
up with each other if you're not on the same page. Yeah, but a lot of the things that she would, even in the going back to the beginning of the movie, a lot of the things that she would say or the way that she was with her past relationships, I was like, oh, maybe there's something else that she has to explore here that obviously this movie is not going to do.
that's so interesting. I never even thought about that. I think I just thought of it as like one of them finding out they're more gay than straight, and one of them finding out they're more straight than gay,
Okay.
but they both have a little touch of the gay. But that's just me and my own little fan viewing of it, and certainly
Sure.
not like, I'd be interested to know 20 plus years later what the women who wrote it
Yes.
think about it. But I feel like for me as somebody who was like in her late 20s in that period, so like, not old, but old enough to have remembered the
Sure.
different cultural feeling of the time. I feel like it was very much of the time and weirdly very progressive for the time, whereas now it feels regressive.
Sure.
It also feels very cliche to have a queer movie where the problem of the movie is being queer.
Mm,
And I know that that's like a conversation a lot,
right.
at least among queer women, is like we're all, I think, kind of like, ugh, my kingdom for a lesbian rom-com where the central problem of the film isn't, oh no, I'm gay. Like,
Right. Because
I would
I mean,
love,
we're beyond that in our society, but this movie was not, there was nothing before this movie in society at that time
I
that
think that
could have
people
explored
couldn't,
it.
yeah, I think society was such that people couldn't understand a coming out as anything other than an obstacle.
Mm,
And also, I think especially if you had two straight people writing a movie about queer people, you couldn't have conceived of realizing that you're gay as anything other than a problem to be solved and overcome. And I think that I know that we're not like there are places and families and there are people living in
right.
parts of our country being raised in religions where that is still true. But I think overall, the aggregate of our society, there are a lot of places in America we're in a better, more advanced place. But I think that that's still like, I would love it if we could get to the point where you get a queer rom-com where the premise is just as stupid and silly as straight rom. Like I want the straight rom-com where it's like this lesbian will inherit $3 million from her grandfather, but she only gets it if she can get married in 3 days. Like
Right, right.
I want
Well, you know what? Maybe that's coming because there's no reason that it can't.
I want that nonsense where it's like they're already gay, they're already out, they already have a dating history. And the problem is some absolute nonsense.
Hmm.
I mean, like I'm allergic to cats, and I fell in love with America's foremost cat veterinarian, and that's the problem. Like, the problem is, will seasonal allergies keep these two apart? Like, I want that rom-com.
I mean, you say that you want it, but I feel like, especially as a writer and as a comedy writer, I feel like if you actually saw that movie, you'd be like, oh, this is terrible for
I would
other
be
reasons.
delighted. I
Other
mean,
reasons.
just the cat puns alone, I would be delighted.
Okay, then yeah, that is your assignment. That is your movie to make.
All right, I'll put it on my to-do list.
I mean, I want to go back a little bit into the movie talking about some of the problems. Like, we're not here to crap on this movie. I don't mean it in that way because it's
Yeah,
obviously
no,
very important. But
you can't make me crap on it. I love it too much.
no, yeah, exactly. The When I say problems, I mean like the problems that Jennifer's character thought she was going to have. The way that she kept this relationship secret. She kept calling her her friend. She didn't want to bring her to her brother's wedding, that sort of thing. But then you have this beautiful scene, I think, especially for the time where we didn't know how people would react, where her mother knows and is just, and it's like the best. I will say
That
this to somebody
scene,
who has had it, who had a Jewish mother and had that whole maternal lineage where a lot of them were not super accepting of anything. She, I feel like, was like the Jewish mother you wanted. The way that she responded, just like the scene that I feel like maybe even you as somebody who we're going to now embark on telling people, coming out to people, maybe that was something that gave you hope. Am I putting words in your mouth?
I mean, I grew up Catholic, so there was no hope for me for a coming out, for a nice coming out. Thank you, Danielle. I love and
Well, my
appreciate.
father's side of the family is Catholic, so I do understand.
Yeah, there was no hope for me for a smooth coming out. But I, the thing is, I think that is one of the most gorgeous scenes in any film I have ever seen. It is so beautiful, the way that the mom kind of like stutters and can't quite get her words out, but you know what, you can see her trying to. It is a really, really stunning scene. I think it's just a really stunning scene between a mom and a daughter. It's a really stunning. I really love, like, I didn't grow up Jewish, but I think that their exploration of the way a deep cultural or religious tradition can shape the way a family is going to see events
Mhm.
is really love. Like, I could relate to that part of it very strongly. I just think it's a really, it's a nice, I think it's like a lovely quiet movie in that I don't mean like it's quiet, like it's boring. I mean in that like small moments have really big significance. And
Right.
I think that scene really encapsulates that. I think you're right.
And I do think that is indicative of like the fact that they made this the way they wanted to. I feel like if there was more of a big studio involvement, some of the things you were talking about earlier would have been blown up even bigger. And something like this, I don't know if at that time they would have allowed a scene like that, or if they would have had to make the conflict, had to make the obstacle like you're not being accepted, and does that weigh on your decision later to
That's a
stay in
yeah.
this relationship?
No, that's a really good point. And I have to say for that time also like that was really progressive to see a
Yeah.
scene where a parent it doesn't come around to accepting their kid, but from the get-go, they're trying to help their kid accept themselves.
Hmm.
That was really stunning and really something new.
And you did mention that you like saw a lot of yourself in the character. Obviously, the part where you're realizing like, oh, I am definitely gay, but also the writer. Were there any other things that you related to that were more character traits? Because I will say I don't identify as queer. I identified a lot with this character
Yeah,
because there
Lucy,
were
yeah.
just things that she would do, like the ranting about like hating computers because they're numbing society. I was like, that's ahead of your time for 2001. Like I'm with you, you know, like little things like that. And even just honestly for me, there was, I know this was a bigger moment towards her accepting her identity, but like the whole speech on the street of like, if you know yourself well enough, you know how you're going to respond in any reaction is something I've always believed. And obviously in the movie, it's used to say like, maybe you don't. But for me, I was like, no, I'm that person. Like I feel like I truly, and I'm still stuck in that mentality of like, I know how I'm going to react in any given situation. You can test me, you can try me, but I'm not going to be surprised. Anyway, that's too much about me.
No, I love it. I think I thought all of that, but what happens is I think that when you society is set up with a bunch of rules, right, that we have all agreed to live by, and that's how society works. When you realize you are queer, you are inherently thrust into a role of breaking a lot of rules.
Hmm.
And I think, and look, whether those rules are just or not, or moral or not, or make sense or not, but by the sheer fact of living your life as an openly queer person, you are suddenly you are suddenly opting out of a bunch of the rules that society has that we've all agreed upon. And I think that is the part that I identified the most, that she's kind of constantly portrayed as this. I mean, she's like, isn't she a copy editor? Like she
Yeah.
literally is like checking people's grammar for a living, right? It's like that would a perfect what a perfect profession to have given this character, right? She's uptight, she follows the rules. Josh, her ex-boyfriend, mentions that she like doesn't know how to loosen up, how to let
Hmm.
go, how to open up. So I think those are the things that I really identified with, is people tend to describe me as kind of a buttoned up person. And then I really love that. I think that's what I saw her wrestling with, was not even like, ooh, gay people are gross, but like, no,
Yeah.
I go by the book. I do things by the book. This is not by the book. And I think that's really interesting, because I think that even the most type A square queer person is forced to then carve out a new path. And I think that part is really, that's really interesting to me.
I think that's also why with the ending, I wasn't always so willing to just say, oh yeah, she's definitely going back to Josh, because the ending, she's the most casual and like literal hair let down, like wild hair than we've ever
Yes.
seen her.
Yes, the hair change. What a lovely
And
hair.
like pursuing art instead of
Yes.
that straight and
She's
narrow,
wearing a
like,
jean jacket instead of her like constant Ann Taylor Loft look she has the whole movie. I mean, all of it is really lovely. Yeah, I don't know that I buy her ending up with Josh at the end of the
right.
movie. But I will say the first time I saw it, I was that we learned that she ends up with Josh like in the last 2 minutes of the movie, and at that part I was probably just so blacked out from my personal realization that I think I just never really the ending is a little bit of a
Well,
PS
she
for
gives
me.
him an email address. To me,
Yeah,
that's not married and living happily ever after in a castle in the, sky. So I think also, there are probably people who watched the movie that still wanted a traditional ending because they weren't maybe learning the lessons that they should have been learning through the movie. And so maybe they just put something in there that was a little vague to pacify everybody.
maybe, and maybe, yeah, maybe they felt like they couldn't have the two women end up together because that would be too threatening at the time. It also has to be said that there is a long, I'm sure you know, a very long, deep tradition of two women falling in love in films and TV, consummating, and then one of them dying. So the fact that
Yes.
both of them live,
Yes. Okay, that's fair. I mean, they were both young. Like that would have been a totally different movie. A
right? The
tragic,
fact
like
that it
gets
isn't
hit by a
like,
car or something.
right, right, that one of them doesn't like fall off a bridge.
Right.
So I think like I think you gotta take your wins in 2002 where you can get them.
That's
And I think,
fair.
yeah,
This is so nitpicky, but you said you saw it, you got free tickets. Did you see one of the early before it was a wide release screening? Do you remember?
possibly because I was seeing it in an art house film.
The
I
reason
don't,
I'm asking is because I'm trying to unearth the early version because there were scenes with the twin, like the scene that took place with Twin Towers in the background that they removed because after 9/11 it was like upsetting to people. But I'm curious, and maybe you remember seeing some of these scenes, or maybe they weren't in your version. But the reason I'm saying this is because I'm curious when you remove scenes and there were more than one, what that does to the narrative. If there were things that maybe were important that were left
I
out.
think you would have had to see it at a film festival to have
Yes,
seen it.
probably.
So I did not see that. Yeah. But then you and I can choose to believe that one of the scenes that was cut was her whispering, turning to the camera and saying, I'm not really in love with Josh.
Right. Yes. Yes. I will say I think they maybe wrote themselves in a corner because I did not like his character. And so that is that he was just so like
Uh-huh.
angry in certain moments. Not loudly, of course, but just not I didn't like the way he reacted to some of the changes that she was making. So I don't want them together. Anyway.
She can do better.
Yes. And isn't that really the point of a lot of these rom-coms is like you're supposed to leave the person, the ex, in the past. That's the lesson you're supposed to learn,
Right.
regardless of gender and identity. Like it, whoever
Mhm.
that older person was, they're your past.
Yeah, it's the person that you think in the beginning that you want. You grow and then you realize you don't want that. It's like the end of Swingers when the girl finally calls him back on the answering machine and he's been on this adventure and it's like,
True.
actually, that's not who I need right now.
That's true. Yeah. Then learning about like the business of the movie. And did that, whether it was the business of the movie or just the movie at all and the structure and like loving this story, did that affect the type of writing you then wanted to start doing?
I don't know that this movie specifically, but I will say any story that comes to me about somebody writing their own stuff and creating their own way and their own path has always really meant a lot to me. And I've really kind of I feel like almost like it's like a you know like in a video game in like an early video game there's a bar on the top of the screen that shows how much power you
Oh
have.
yeah, I was like sort of. I'm not a huge gamer, but yes, yes, I do
Me
remember that.
either, as evidenced by the fact that I don't know what the bar is called. But I feel like every time I hear a story like that, it's like I gain a little more power. I store it, and I feel like it makes me stronger. It gives me more resolve. It makes me feel more confident moving forward. Because, like I said, like look, I'm at this point, I'm middle-aged. I'm queer. I'm Latina. Like no one is sitting in an office right now in a studio being like, get me a middle-aged queer Latina. Like no one.
I would like to believe that's not true. I think my cynicism and certainly my years in this business tell me you're probably right.
Right.
But let's try to be optimistic.
Uh,
Maybe.
but I think the thing is that like, but everything I've gotten to do career-wise is because it's a thing that I have made and done
Sure.
myself. And people have certainly given me opportunity. Like Seth Meyers hired me, and that was a huge, important turning point in my career. But the things that almost everything I do on camera at that show is something that I write
Right.
myself, right? So I think that like, and then um, the live show that I'm doing right now came out of me sitting idle during the strike and being like, oh, I have to do something. What is in my weird little heart that I want to do? I have a book coming out next year, and that was
Nice.
also just had to do with like, okay, well, I'm going 5 months in this strike, I'm just sitting here, bored. If I had to say something and I wanted to write something and it wasn't for a boss or for a job, what would I want to say? And I think anytime you can like, no one's going to come to me and be like, Jenny, could you please write us a book? But like, but I just, you know what I mean? Like anything that I've done has been really rewarding has
Right.
come from me being like, all right, well, let me create an opportunity. Let me try to create an opportunity for myself.
So with those things, the show and the book, like obviously for anyone who has seen, I would argue, clips of the show on your Instagram, there's humor. Like it's called You're Giving Advice, but it's, most of the advice we're not really going to take because it's not great advice. No offense. Um, Although there was one where you just yelled, quit your job. And I was like, yes, I love that. That has always been my motto. Just quit.
Just
Um,
quit.
when you're working on things like that, or even the book, if you want to talk a little bit about the book, if it's not too early, what is your barometer for like sincerity and comedy and how much of either one and where they maybe need to meet?
That's a great question. I'll be honest. So I do actually also give very sincere advice at the show.
Well, was it in the clips that people have
I know. I
seen?
was gonna say I don't tend to post them because like I don't, I'm not trying to post
Yeah.
like downers on Instagram
Yeah.
but I think that they can both coexist because I think that's how we all coexist in life, right? Like if you and I were meeting over beers and you were like, I'm having the worst problem at work or I'm in this relationship and I don't know what to do, probably we would talk about it seriously and joke at the
Mhm.
same time.
Mhm.
So I think, and I also think that like humor is a really powerful messenger, not to be corny about comedy, but I do think that when you joke around, sometimes you help people bring their guard down and lower their defenses so that they can maybe hear a hard truth.
Yeah.
Or maybe you can come up with a funny analogy where you're like, well, I'm not going to tell you what to do at your job, but let's say there was a dog and the dog was in the Westminster Dog Show, but the dog hates being in dog show. Like, do you know what I mean? Like that sometimes you can come up with a silly or creative way that is easier for someone to hear
Right.
than the phrase leave your husband.
Well, sometimes though people need to hear it
Boy, don't they,
outright
Danielle?
because
Don't
I
they?
was like listening to your analogy about the dog show being like, it's probably going to be a good one, and yet people are not going to apply it to their own life because, like, how similar could we possibly be to a dog? Well, a lot, but nobody wants to think that way.
I know. People will always they'll say something like, "Oh, I get it. You're a parent. I mean, I have a dog, and I don't mean to compare my dog to your kid." I'm like, "Please compare away."
I mean, I was just going to say I am that person. Like before we started recording, I almost said my son might wander through, and then I was like, no, you have an actual son. I'm not going to say that because he
It's
sometimes just wanders in the background.
it's pretty much the same thing.
I mean, I think I am well adjusted enough to know it's not. Like it's similar, especially when they're young, but I'm not putting anyone through college. Let's go that
Right,
way.
right. No, that's fair. That's fair.
The reason I asked about the comedy and the sincerity is also kind of because of your present pop culture pick, because I know you wanted to talk about the Pee Wee as himself documentary, which
Yes.
I mean, I'm assuming you grew up watching the Pee Wee
Yes.
show and maybe not even like as they discuss in the documentary, not really knowing the man behind. But
That's right. I think because I grew up pre-internet, you couldn't just instantly know. That's the thing is like I think people who are young now don't realize that we grew up in a world where you couldn't just instantly know the
yeah,
truth about any celebrity. You could wonder forever and just not know. The
I
only
would
way,
like to
you know what I
say
mean?
that
Like
I don't think you can know the truth now either. You can only know what they're willing to say. So,
that's
like, I
true. I
don't buy
mean,
it most of the time.
yeah,
When I
I mean,
see an Instagram, it's curated.
but there are some things you can know. Like I can go to Wikipedia and find out someone's birthday. The
Oh,
whole way I
sure.
used to find out celebrities' birthdays was at the end of every episode of Entertainment Tonight. They would say celebrating a birthday today, and you would find out what four celebrities had that birthday. And that was, but I think it's like we just have so much information at our fingertips
Mhm.
now. And I think Pee Wee, I just think Paul Reubens is a really fascinating person because I feel like his whole career was almost like a giant performance art performance. I
Yeah.
think that he took on this persona and then gave interviews as this persona, really lived this persona. So many of the beautiful production elements of his movies and his shows were like through the mind of this person that he had created. But then I think also, there was always speculation about his sexuality, speculation about whether he was like a pervert, which is always like often code for
Yeah.
queer. Um, and like I'm not a psychologist, though I do charge people $15 to hear my advice.
I was going to
Um,
say, but again, the advice, some of it is just for fun.
just for fun. But and some of it is real. Leave your husband. But I think that you have to wonder how much of him creating a persona was a human shield so that he was
Mhm.
protected from people really knowing him or people making accusations about him, right? Like if this is like a giant man child who lives in a silly house, that cartoon house, then you can't ask questions about that person's sexuality because what kind of a weirdo wants to know? Like he's like a grown-up 8-year-old. He doesn't
Mhm.
have sexuality. So we can't dig around and ask questions about it. If you give interviews as a persona, no one you go on David Letterman as Pee Wee Herman, David Letterman can't ask you about your personal life.
That's
If,
fair. Yeah.
if his personal life is I hang out with John B. and Cherry. So
Hmm.
I think like to me he's really really fascinating because I think he's on the surface very silly, and I don't think you have to scratch very far beneath the surface to see that he was actually a very like really a genius. And I
Yeah.
think that and dealing with some incredibly complex social things. And it's so fascinating to me that he didn't come out until that documentary. I think we don't, I think because we've had so much progress in queer rights and queer acceptance in the last 20 years, I feel like we don't really talk enough about internalized homophobia,
Hmm.
really deep effects that it can have. And I thought that was a really, I mean, sad, but lovely to see an exploration of the effect of internalized homophobia on somebody that people really love.
Do you feel like you got, I don't know if this is going to come out sounding fair, but do you feel like you got to really know him through the documentary, or do you feel like there were still things that you wish he would have been more open about? Because he does obviously give interviews. He did not give interviews about everything. And I can understand why, the harder pieces, the pieces where they're raiding his house because he's been accused of having child pornography, like you don't want to revisit that. You don't want to talk about it. As somebody with a production background and who has covered productions for so many years, a little part of me is like, well, as that filmmaker, I do feel like he should have not forced him, but like pressed harder to get some of that. But then I also know, well, he was dying and nobody knew he was dying. So it's also hard to say, could that have even happened? I don't know. I left the documentary with still a lot of questions, not about who he was necessarily, but about how he felt about certain things. And I'm wondering if that matters to you, if you felt the same way, or if you feel like, no, this is a very important piece of his legacy, regardless of whether we can say it's complete.
Oh, for sure, I had more questions. I think you're right to wonder, like, I wonder if the filmmaker pressed him as far as he was able to go. I also feel like, again, not to pretend to be a psychologist, but let's
I think
see.
it's fine if you do. I used to write a whole
Basically,
column about the psychology of Dexter. Like that's how I would literally recap the show every week, like from a certain, and I have no credits. And also they also have like changed what they call him throughout the years. So like what are we even doing? It's fine. We can be armchair psychologists.
right. So, as an armchair psychologist, I also wonder if you live so long hiding or repressing certain things. I don't know that you can throw on a switch at the end of your life and then suddenly feel free to examine it. You know what I mean? Like
Okay,
that
that's
might
true.
be as much reflection, self-reflection as he was
Mm,
capable of at the end of his life. Like him saying that
yeah.
he was gay was even such a big step. Like to be able to then, like, I don't know how much, I mean, look, we're all probably limited by our own, like, there's only a limit to everybody's perspective on themselves. And
Right.
then you put on top of that the act, the conscious act to hide it for so long,
Yeah.
that becomes reflex, I think. So I think I both, yeah, of course, there was a lot more curiosity for me after seeing it, but I also felt like really lucky that we were able to get that
Yeah.
much access before he passed.
Yeah, I mean, I think because there's a part in the very beginning of the documentary where he says he's like taking umbrage with the filmmaker saying you can't have perspective on yourself. So when they put that in the movie, I kind of said, "Oh, maybe these are things that he has come to terms with internally that he just hasn't ever said out loud. And maybe that's what this documentary is." And I did feel that way. I mean, especially like talking about his relationships, but then at the end, I wasn't entirely sure. Well, maybe it's the timing of they couldn't get these interviews because, or maybe he didn't want to. But either way, I will say for myself watching the documentary, as I wasn't allowed to watch the Pee Wee Herman show as a child, and I still don't know why. I would say that it might have been my parents not understanding what it was. They like to like censor a lot of things in the house, and I do wonder if maybe some of the chatter about like, well, he got arrested might have seeped into some of that at a certain point. I
Interesting.
don't know. My mother's not here to ask. My father has no memory. So he would probably tell me that he never banned it, and that is not true. So, all that to be said, like my understanding of who he was not until I was older watching things with a different lens.
Hmm.
And so I saw the performance art because I was watching it older. But you, if you're watching it when you're younger, I'm curious what you thought of the show and like if there were things you identified with in the show that then watching this documentary, that's what gave you the additional perspective and the additional understanding.
The funny thing is, I was a little too old to catch it as a children's show at the age for which it was aimed.
Okay.
So I think when I found it, I don't know if the years line up, but I was watching it like middle school, high school. And so I wasn't enjoying it like as a child watching a children's
Right.
show. I was watching it. What really clicked for me about it was that it was so subversive, and I didn't have a word for that. I didn't know
Mhm.
that word, but I remember watching it being like, this is a kid's show, but he's doing stuff that's not like some of the stuff is not for kids. I was like he'd say certain things and be like, wait, that has a double meaning. How is
Right.
he getting away with this on the kids? Like, or he would do things that were like winks to the camera.
Hmm.
And I thought that was so cool. I just thought, I was like, I just remember feeling like this is a kid show, but something else is going on here. And that was the thing that made me just obsessed with it. Like I watched it all the time. I thought it was so interesting. And I think it was like probably my brain was trying to, because I think I was probably like, my brain was probably trying to wrap itself around satire or wrap itself around like double entendre and stuff like
Right.
that. I think that's what really sparked me as like somebody who was fascinated by comedy and didn't have the language for it yet.
So then when you're watching the documentary, how important was it to get kind of the behind the scenes of that creation? Because I guess you were already understanding it when you were watching it the first time. I was picturing it differently. I was picturing it like if you're little watching it, just immersed in the world, and all of a sudden, years later as an adult, you have a different perspective.
It was cool to hear him put it into words because again, like I think the last time I had watched it, I hadn't had the words for what Pee Wee
Hmm.
Herman is, and I think or what Pee Wee's Playhouse was, and there was one point where he says in the documentary, he's like, children's television was like the Wild West. Nobody was paying attention to us. We could say whatever, and that's crazy because I feel like with the real ascent of evangelicalism in our culture in the
Uh-huh.
last like 20 years and the way it has seeped into all kinds of lawmaking and regulation of art and education and textbooks, like it feels like it's everywhere. I feel like children, anything related to children is being so closely
Yeah.
watched now that it's wild to me to have to be like, well, it wasn't real TV, it was for kids, so we could say anything.
Yeah, yeah.
That's crazy. And that also explains why he was like slipping in all these like double meanings and stuff. It's fantastic. And so I think that to me was really interesting. And then I loved also just knowing, again, to get back to that kind of like, hey kids, let's put on a show
Hmm.
kind of. I loved knowing that he also was like deeply involved in like making sure the credit sequence, the opening credit sequence was how he wanted it. He chose that artist so specifically to design the interior of the playhouse. And he was so intentional in his choices about everything visually. It's cool to know that he just was a 360-degree artist. Like he wasn't just putting on a bow tie and doing a funny voice. He had
Right.
very strong opinions about what does the music look like? What kind of little cartoons are we showing? What is the vibe? What is
Hmm.
the aesthetic here? I loved knowing all that. What a true artist.
Yeah. When you look at the documentary itself, like, is that part of the influence now? Like the way that the story was told, the format at all, especially being a storyteller yourself, was there anything that you felt particularly strongly about with the two part here?
That's a great question. I think that to me, the things that really moved me about the documentary were, again, like examining the influence on somebody being closeted and that, like, he really was ambitious and wanted to be successful, which is fine. And that's a fine thing for people to want, especially people who are artistically driven. But that he really had to make a choice between his personal life and his artistic life. And he chose his artistic life. And then to think about I hope when people watch it, they think about the ways in which that impacted. Like,
Yeah.
if he could have lived openly as his true self, is that what he would have created, or would he have created something else? Like,
Hmm.
the idea that
Oh,
he
that's
chose.
interesting. I didn't even think of it that way. I kept thinking of it at like, I wonder. if the reason that he wasn't living openly was because he was making a kids show and he was worried about what people would say
But he
versus
wasn't making that kid show till many years down the line. Like he had
no,
his
I know, but at
yeah.
that point he'd already decided like and so at a certain point I do feel like if you've decided I'm going to stay closeted or just private or however we want to word it, and then you make a kids show that's giving you almost an excuse, I think, to stay private because it's like, what would they say about me if they don't like gay people and they know I'm a gay man making this show?
To
Like, do
me,
they think I'm
like
trying to send my agenda to the children the way that we always hear stupid politicians say things like that?
to me, it seemed like he'd made that choice years before because he
Yeah.
had that partner he was very close with, and he broke up with
Hmm.
him. He was like, "I'm going to be successful instead."
Hmm.
So to me, it's like really, again, armchair psychologist.
Sure.
It
Yeah. We
doesn't
don't
feel
know. We don't know him.
I don't know. But to me, it feels doesn't feel like a coincidence that he was like, oh, okay, if I want to be successful, I can't be myself. And then he literally created a world where he is not himself, where
Right.
every moment of the day he is someone else.
Right.
And I just feel like that, I feel like those two things cannot be, they can't be disconnected. I think like I wonder who he would have been artistically if he had not literally had to create an alter ego that was divorced from sexuality. So that to me was like a really, really interesting aspect of it. But the other thing that I really took away from it is I think that again, like this idea of like kind of creating your own path, right? He was very specific. He had a very specific, even Pee Wee Herman aside, like he had been to art school. He
Yeah.
was interested in visual art. He had a very specific aesthetic. He was a really unique and singular voice. And I'm always really inspired when somebody who is so specific is able to carve a path. They are so drawn to this kind of expression. This is going to sound like a very silly parallel, but like I find people like Pee Wee Herman or even like Weird Al Yankovic very
Oh, yeah.
inspiring because like again like a very specific singular voice, and
Hmm.
those are both things like to my earlier point. No one is sitting in an office in Hollywood being like, bring me an adult man in a bow tie with lipstick, and no one is saying, bring me a guy who makes parody songs and plays the accordion. No
That's
one. No
true.
one is asking for that. And I just love that those are two humans who are examples of like, okay, but that's what's in me. That's what is burning in me like a fire. So I am going to put it out into the world, whether you have asked for it or not. And what makes work like that engaging is because someone is so moved to make it. And work that comes from the center of people's heart is always the most engaging. And that is where you get the work that you love that you didn't even know you wanted.
Yeah.
Like I, I didn't know I wanted to watch a man talk in a weird falsetto in a house full of puppets. I did not know I wanted that. But because this man presents it with such a fire and such a passion, then yes, I will sit and watch hours of it.
So you know that obviously is leading me to the question of what is the fire in you that you are like, I have to put this out. Obviously the show and the book, yes, but is there more there that you want to talk about?
Oh, that's really interesting. I don't know that I have a specific topic that I ever feel like is the topic that I want to talk about, but I think I really love trying to find, always kind of trying to investigate the intersection between things that are funny and sincere, right?
Okay.
That like I will sometimes say that like to me like the best art is funny and beautiful and true. And if you can find the place where those three things intersect, where someone is having an experience that where they feel like they are hearing something that resonates with them because it's true, but they are also laughing, and that the two haven't you haven't gotten them out of balance. If you can find that
Hmm.
lovely balance where you're having both experiences at once, because there are plenty of things that are just funny to be funny, and that's a delight.
Right.
There are things that are beautiful and true, and they are like heavy or sincere, and
Yep.
that's also a great experience artistically. But if you can find the place where those things come together, that is such a lovely feeling. To me, that feels like your brain is being lit in all the quadrants.
Is that scripted?
I mean, it depends. I think I'm hoping like that's kind of what I'm aiming for with my book.
Hmm.
And then also, and that's what I hope the experience is that when people come to my live show, because I think the questions dictate. I mean, some questions are so silly and so,
Right. You can't
but
really write like a narrative because you don't know what you're going to get.
But some questions are really serious, and I do try to honor that. Like I've had a couple very vulnerable, I would say more than a couple. I'm really impressed. I thought people would come and just come to for people who haven't been to it.
Hmm.
The way my show works is it's called Jenny Hagel Gives Advice. And when the audience comes into the door, they're given a couple blank index cards and a pen. And while they're waiting for the show to start, there are buckets on stage that say job advice, financial advice, love advice. And people write down questions and they put them in the buckets. And then throughout the show, myself and another guest comedian pull questions out at random and answer their questions. And then at the end of the show, a real therapist comes on stage and tells us if we did a good job or not. Um, but as we're answering the questions, I think I thought it would be a lot of very silly, flippant joke questions. And I
Right.
have gotten a really lovely number, a touching number of very sincere questions that people will ask about their lives, maybe because there's some safety in the privacy of
Yeah.
it, because there's safety in like the fact that, well, it's a comedy show, it doesn't really count, right? Um, and if a question is serious, I really try to honor its seriousness. And like, what do I know? Like I said, I am not a psychologist, but I think just like you, we're all somebody who's lived on Earth for a certain number of years,
Right.
had a certain number of experiences, and sometimes it takes a person you don't know to tell you the thing that your friend can't tell you.
Well, that's the whole point of therapy. Like you're going to a stranger to give you maybe not advice, because I know a lot of them don't do that. They just want to hear you talk through it on your own. But that's the whole point is like you need that perspective from someone else. And if
Right.
everybody
Yeah.
in your life is telling you something and you just don't trust what they're telling you, putting it in one of your buckets and seeing what you have to say is sometimes like the voice maybe that might align with what they've been hearing this whole time and might be the thing that says, okay, I finally have to listen to this, or might be the total opposite and be like, see, I knew I shouldn't have listened to this.
Right. But yeah, sometimes it just triggers something in your gut. I think
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah. So I do want to talk a little bit about the show, if we can, because it's obviously in select cities, and obviously everybody can go on your Instagram at Jenny Hagel to find out if you'll be where they are. But because you did mention you bring on guests, you bring on a therapist, what has been the most surprising piece of it for you outside of the actual questions that you might get, like the interactions with the people that you're bringing in? Is there something that you looked for from that guest, from that therapist in the beginning that as the show has gone on, you've had to change or wanted,
Oh,
had to change is strong, that you've wanted to change, that you've tweaked along the way?
I will say I've really been really fortunate with guests. They've all been lovely. When I'm looking to invite a guest, it's always somebody who I've had some kind of interaction with in real life, and I think like, oh, this is a person who I would just think would give lovely advice.
Okay.
And they really have. It's been true of all of them. And the thing I've been really surprised by and really touched by is they're all the people I've asked to be guests are very naturally funny people, but they have all very quickly taken seriously, done exactly the thing I was mentioning of like, oh, we got a serious question. Okay, yeah. All right. My mom has 6 months to live and like blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
like, hey, I just, there was one that was so sweet that somebody wrote, I'm 40 and I just came out as a lesbian and I'm
Wow.
getting a divorce from my husband. I'm really scared to start dating. How am I supposed to do this? And I thought, what a vulnerable, beautiful question. And it's so lovely to watch people who are stand-ups, people who make their living getting laughs, to just like take a moment and be like, hey, here's what I think.
Yeah.
Really, that's been really charming. One thing that we did change that I think really helped was the first time I did it, it was maybe 30 minutes of advice and then the therapist came on.
Hmm.
And my producer, Justin McGriff, said, hey, I've got an idea. He's like, the show feels like this structurally.
Hmm.
So he said, what if you, after you did a speed round and you did like put a timer at the very end after
Oh,
you guys
right.
advice for a while? What if you did like a 5 minute speed round where you try to get through as many questions as possible, both so that it gives you a
Like a
fluctuation
wave. Yeah.
tempo. You feel like the show has different tempos. And also he's like, then you have that many more people who feel like, oh, they answered my question. And I thought that was really, and it really does. It's lovely. It gives like a nice boost of energy.
Do you find though, if you're doing the speed round, like you're not able to answer some of them as sincerely? So do you specifically look for the funny ones for the speed round?
You can't look for anything. I'm just pulling them out of a bucket. It just
But
is
you're
what it
not,
is.
I don't, so I'm gonna say this as somebody who just doesn't trust anything ever. Like I feel like there's easy ways to mark things in your
I
bucket.
would never.
You don't do
I would,
that.
oh,
Okay.
no, I would never. I also don't have time. People are putting things into the bucket up until the moment I go on stage. So I would never have time to like sift through them, choose them. I also think all of my training is in improv. So I feel
Yeah.
like that's, if there's one thing I can do and I find easier to do is to respond in the moment.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah. But sure, there are some where I'll give a quick advice and in the back of my head I'll be like, oof, that person has some work to do.
Well,
But
that's why the therapist is there because she or he can just be handing out cards, at the
mhm.
end of it. Oh, don't listen to what she said. Come to me instead. I mean, in the end of the day, like you're maybe getting this person a lot of business.
I hope so, because the therapist that I've worked with a bunch of different therapists. The one I've been using lately is a woman named Sydney Corridors, and she's in based in Brooklyn, and she is
But I
excellent.
was gonna say that's local to where you are, but when you travel, she doesn't travel with you.
No, no, I'll be using different therapists. I'm going to be in LA on September 6th using a new therapist there who I've met on the phone but haven't met in real life, and that's going to be exciting too. And then I'll
Hmm.
be Chicago on September 11th, and using a new therapist there who I've never met in person, just talked to on the phone. So it's exciting though. They all sound like great people, and they all know more about psychology than I do. So what can go wrong?
Oh, I'm glad that you just said that. That's an ominous way to end that. Uh, well, so I mean, you did mention the book, so I'm gonna go back to the book because I love talking about books, even though I haven't read this one.
It's
If
not out yet, so if
I
you've
know, I
read
know,
it, yeah,
but
you could have been on my
I
show.
want to say I haven't read this one for listeners who have heard me talk about books before, where I have very specific questions. You were saying that you were writing it like during the strike when you couldn't work on obviously things that were for TV. So how much of what is in the book are things that maybe would have been on TV if they could have been, versus you wanted to take a totally different approach and maybe even tone or path or whatever word you want to use?
That's a great question. I think none of this is stuff that would have made it on TV. I think one thing I really love about writing, and one thing I love about exploring different writing forms is that I think when you have something to say, there is often, I tend to think content dictates form versus form
Hmm. Yeah.
dictates content. So the idea that like if there's a thing I want to say, sometimes that thing is better explored in a sketch. Sometimes it's better explored in a monologue joke. Sometimes it's better explored as an essay. So these are things that I feel like are like the way I wanted to dig into them couldn't really be done in a late night piece.
And what would you classify this as? Is it like essays? Is it a memoir? What?
No, yeah, no, it's a book of essays. It's a book of comedic essays.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I know it's too early for you to be like, this is where you can get it and when you can get it. So we'll just have to follow up with that.
Right now, you can get it in a PDF on my laptop, but
That you
when
will not be willing to share
no,
because it's too
but in
soon.
June
So
it'll drop this next summer. It'll drop this next summer. It's called Advice No One Asked For, and yeah, I hope people will clear a little space for it on their nightstand when it comes out.
I love that. That's a good title too, because you don't know. I mean, clearly people are asking for your advice at these shows. So honestly, by that time, for everybody who has seen the show, there may be things in the book that everybody has been asking for. You never know.
Hey, we'll see what
I
happens,
know.
right?
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Danielle. This was a true pleasure. What a delight to get to talk about Kissing Jessica Stein and Pee Wee Herman. I mean, this was a dream afternoon. Thank you so much.
All right, you loyal Made Possible by Pop Culture listeners and or watchers, you know what time it is in the podcast. That's right. It is time for me to tell you where you can find the things that were discussed on today's episode so you can experience and enjoy them for yourself. So let's start with my guest, Jenny Hagel. She writes and performs on Late Night with Seth Meyers. Now that airs weeknights on NBC and the episodes stream on Peacock. She's also on tour with a comedy show titled Jenny Hagel Gives Advice. And if you want to know if she'll be in a city near you anytime soon, you can follow her on Instagram at Jenny Hagel. Of course, the point of this episode is to talk about past and present pop culture influences. So let's start with her past one, Kissing Jessica Stein. That 2001, 2002 independent rom-com is unfortunately not available to stream at the time of this podcast recording, but you can rent it on Amazon, Apple TV, YouTube, or you know what I've realized recently? Why not just ask around to your friends and family? Maybe somebody has a copy of the DVD that you can watch. Assuming you have a DVD player, of course, because the point of this podcast is to share love of pop culture and maybe even introduce people to new or different things in pop culture than they've experienced before. So let's get your friends and your family involved. Her present day pop culture influence was Pee Wee as himself, two-part documentary streaming on HBO Max. And as always, I also like to remind you that no money has changed hands for me to list any particular service for where to find these things. I'm simply trying to find where they are that is easily accessible to you. And in some cases, it's the only place they're accessible to you. Anyway, thank you so much as always for listening and or watching this episode of Made Possible by Pop Culture, the podcast. We are in season 3. We are still pretty early in season 3, so please don't go anywhere. Come back very soon for the next episode. I'm not going to give you any hints as to who the next guest is just yet, but feel free to leave a comment anywhere you're listening and or watching this, or on my social media for who you think it might be, or maybe even who you want it to be.